I want to start us off with Scarborough's reading rope. Many of you are probably familiar with Scarborough's reading rope. For those of you who aren't, this actually started out just as a handout, a simplistic drawing to represent the complexities and development of reading. Reading is very, very complicated. And as you can see from this rope, there are many, many skills that all weave together to culminate in skilled reading, and that develops over time. Today, our discussion is going to be on the lower half of the reading rope, word recognition. After this session, I will be working on a part 2, which will cover the language comprehension, the upper portion of the reading rope. So I'll be defining what these terms are on the lower side today, and I will also be presenting to you how they can look in a classroom. What I want you to understand about this rope is that's really important, is that if any of the strands fray, that will impact the development of other strands, therefore weakening the rope in its entirety. So it's really important that we are making sure that students are mastering foundational levels. We don't just teach one of these skills at a time, we teach them together. But it's really important that we are watching students and making sure they don't fall behind or their strands aren't fraying at any point, because then the development will be weakened. My goals are very, very quickly to discuss what the difference is between balanced literacy and structured literacy. I really want to dive into what structured literacy is and what it looks like. So that's where we will be spending the majority of the time. I'm going to be giving you a lot of information, and I don't expect you to be able to leave here ready to teach your kids how to read. What I want to give you is an appreciation for the depth and complexity of our spoken and written words. And I want you to be able to understand some of the routines of structured literacy so that if you go back to your classroom or you go back to your teacher, your child's teacher, or you sit in an IEP meeting, you will have an understanding of what it is you are asking for. Phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition from the reading rope are on this list. I have also added fluency and word analysis as well. So we'll get to those at the end. So let's dive in. So balanced literacy doesn't have a clearly defined definition, but these are the most common elements. So the first and probably most well-known is the 3 cueing system, or sometimes it's called MSV, meaning, sentence structure, and visual, or meaning, syntax, visual. So the theory behind this is that students use cues to help them identify words, and that's not the case. So in the 3 cueing system, if a student comes to a word that he doesn't know, he would be prompted to look at the picture to see if he can figure out what the word is, or to use the content of what he's reading to be able to figure it out. He can also use, so that's the meaning or semantics. He can also use the syntax. How is that word being used in the sentence? Is it an adjective describing something? And then you might be able to figure out what adjective would be used to describe the noun, for example. And finally, with the least emphasis is the visual, the graphophonic cue, which is actually the letters there. And typically only the first letter is looked at, and usually those letters are looked at to confirm if their guess, I'll say, of meaning or semantics was right. So they'll confirm if they guess a word and it doesn't start with that same letter in the visual, then they'll have to try again. Running records is probably how most of your students are being assessed. With running records, they are assessed on fluency, the rate at which they read. They're also assessed on behavior, the reading behaviors. So if kids are making errors, it's marked if it's a meaning error, if it's a syntax error, or if it's a visual letter or letters error. And I have not found consistent messaging. Some teachers, these are called miscues. Some teachers say these miscues are errors. Some of them don't count them as errors if they don't change the meaning of the text. The problem with running records is that they stop at fluency. They don't evaluate any or assess anything at a more foundational level than fluency. So if a student isn't reading fluently, this doesn't tell them why. Another hallmark of balanced literacy is word work or mini lessons. Typically these aren't, there's not a lot of emphasis placed on this, and they're not typically systematic, so there's not a clear scope and sequence. Typically these mini lessons are developed based on teacher observation. If a teacher sees that kids are struggling with a certain spelling pattern, she might do a mini lesson on that and then move on. But there's usually not a connection to the print that the students are reading either. Guided reading is another component. And in guided reading, these are small homogeneous groups that teachers use leveled books to read with their kids. And the leveling system is different based on the curriculum. And we're going to be looking at the difference between decodable books and leveled books when we talk about fluency later. But in these leveled books, just as a heads up, they are not leveled. The criteria for choosing leveled books, the criteria is not phonics based. It is just based on vocabulary, the number of words in a sentence, it's a background knowledge, etc. And finally, intervention typically includes all of these components: word study, fluency, comprehension. Structured literacy, on the other hand, only uses decoding to identify unknown words. The first rule of reading is keep your eyes on the words. So kids are taught to sound out the words, not to use anything else on the page to figure it out, only the letters that are there. Teachers use diagnostic assessments to figure out if a student isn't reading fluently, why? So we need to go back to the very foundation to find where the holes are. Progress monitoring to make sure that they are making meaningful progress, not just progress, but how is that progress stacked up against their peers? If they're not making meaningful progress at the same rate or a faster rate than their peers, then they never have a chance to catch up. And we also have summative assessments that are cumulative assessments of everything that's taught. Phonics lessons are emphasis in kindergarten, first grade. Phonemic awareness and phonological awareness and phonics lessons are key. In kindergarten, first grade, we start working with word meanings, or meaningful parts of words, going on to second, third, fourth, and fifth grade. But the instruction is always explicit, it's always systematic, and I will explain what that means on the next slide. Leveled books aren't used. Decodable books, so these are books that students apply their knowledge of sound, spelling, correspondences in connected text. And as I said, we're going to get to this in more detail later. And finally, intervention targets students' most pressing needs. If I have 30 minutes with a child, if I can with confidence say that that child can comprehend the text, if he could read it, then I'm not going to work on comprehension with that child. I'm going to work on the most pressing needs. So if he has a deficiency in phonological awareness, that is where I am going to spend my time with him. And I will worry about, I'm hoping that and assuming that comprehension instruction is happening in the core classroom. I want to make it very clear, structured literacy is not just phonics. It includes all strands of the reading rope, the what. It also includes how those strands are taught, the pedagogy. And when those come together, the content and the instruction, it equals effective reading instruction. So what is structured literacy? This is an infographic from IDA that I pulled. This is the what, the content. And I'm going to be going through this, but I'm not going to be talking about syntax and semantics today. I will be talking about the rest. This next circle is the how. So systematic means there is a clear scope and sequence that is that's designed from easiest concepts to more difficult concepts over time. It's cumulative, so new material is taught based on previous learning. And there is a lot of repetition. It's not drill and kill, it's not rote memorization. It's embedded practice after direct instruction, which leads me to explicit, which is direct instruction. Explicit means we don't leave anything to chance. I don't assume you know it. I tell you what you're doing and why you're doing it and why it's important for you to do it that way. And this is done through routines that you will see shortly. And it's diagnostic. So we identify very intentionally what the students need. And that is done through informal and formal assessments. And when you put those elements and principles together, you get effective reading instruction for all students. So let's dig in. Now, penmanship isn't on the reading rope, but I thought it important to include because from my experience, penmanship is not explicitly taught. There are dozens of research articles out there about the importance of handwriting and reading writing. And I don't have time to go into all of that now, but it's very important that letter formation, letter naming is very explicit. We teach kids exactly how to write. And from my experience, it is much easier to learn it right the first time than to have to unlearn and relearn how to form the letters properly. So now we're going to move on to phonological awareness. It says that it can be done with your eyes shut. It's all listening. It's not recommended that it's done with your eyes shut because you want the students looking at your mouth so that they can see your enunciation, your formation of letters and sound, or your formation of sounds. But before we get into phonological awareness, I want us to take a little quiz. Now you're going to keep your microphones off, but I would like you to say, I'm going to change my screen here. I would like you to say the answer, even though you'll be keeping your mic off. All right, so we're going to take a little quiz. What is the middle word in this sequence? In the pond. The, okay? Say two words that rhyme with the word ate. Great, freight, late. Okay? Show me with your fingers, how many syllables do you hear in the word conversation? Okay, 4. Say the first sound in the word Florida. Now, if anybody said full, that's a blend, but it's 2 sounds. The first sound is just. How many sounds, show me with your fingers, how many sounds do you hear in the word tree? 3, T-R-E. How many sounds do you hear in the word 3? R-E. 3 again. How many sounds do you hear in the word axe? Like I used an axe to cut down the tree. 3. Ax. Now we don't teach X as 2 sounds. Because it's in our alphabet, we teach X. But if a student is having difficulty hearing, we can help them segment those sounds. So let's move on. Phonological awareness, what is it? Phonology is the sound system of our language. So when we're babies and toddlers, we learn to listen to language for meaning. So if I say to my child, stop, I'm not asking her to identify how many sounds were in that word or how many syllables. I'm asking her to knock it off. So meaning. So think of when you hear a foreign language, can you identify each individual word in that language if you don't know it, let alone the sounds within each word? So it's very difficult for students if they haven't been trained. Now, some students may be more aware than others at various levels, but it's very important that we teach kids to be aware of the sound structure of our language. So phonological awareness is an umbrella term. It's the ability to recognize and identify and recognize the speech sounds in our language. At early levels, we work with words and sentences. I'm not going to be able to define all of these. We're going to have to move on, but a few I want to actually identify. Alliteration would be like, go get the green grass from the garden. Okay, so working with the beginning sounds of within sentences. Onset and rhyme, that R-I-M-E is not misspelled. Onset and rhyme, onset is everything before the vowel. The rhyme is the vowel and everything after. So in the word bat, the onset is B, the rhyme is at. The rhyme, R-I-M-E, is what makes words rhyme, R-H-Y-M-E. So at rhymes with bat because of the rhyme. Remember, this is all sounds. We're not talking about how they're spelled. We're just listening for sounds. Then we move on to our basic level of phonological awareness, and we talk about phonemic awareness. A phoneme is the smallest speech sound in a word. Hang on, I need to close this. Pardon me. Okay, smallest speech sound in a word. And phonemic awareness is being able to identify, recognize, and manipulate speech sounds in our words independent of meaning. So I don't know if any of you, maybe I'll date myself, remember Wendy, Wendy, Bo Bendy, Banana, Fana, Fo Fendi. Okay, that was a phonemic awareness game. I am manipulating the sounds. Doesn't matter that the words don't have meaning. They're just games. We teach phonemic awareness through blending and segmentation. Blending is when we're putting sounds together to make words, and that's going to help them in their decoding. Segmentation is taking a word and breaking it up individual sounds, and that's going to help them in their spelling, as we'll see later. And finally, we move on to our advanced phonological awareness. And this is more, I would say, a little bit, in my world, a little bit newer, where a lot of programs who have phonological awareness will have some of the early and basic, but not as much as of the advanced phonological awareness. And this is really important, and you're going to see examples of this now. So I'm going to show you one example from early, one from basic, and one from advanced. Okay, I'm going to show you a word, and we are going to clap out the syllables. Syllable is a part of a word. So I am going to say zebra. I'd like everybody to say zebra. Now we are going to tap out zebra like this. Zebra. Do it with me, please. Zebra. How many syllables do we have? 2. Okay. Let's do it together again. Everybody, this is a porcupine. Everybody say porcupine. Let's tap out porcupine. Porcupine. How many syllables? 3. Last one, we're going to segment rocket. Everybody say rocket. Let's segment the syllables. Rocket. How many syllables? 2. Now, some kids may need a little more manipulation. Some kids may need to go a little bit slower. Everybody's on a different spectrum. But what we're doing is we're telling the kids what we're doing. We are modeling it for them, and we are helping them to segment the syllables. That's going to be your early. Let's move on to phoneme segmentation, which is going to be more of the basic. So we are going to now take that concept of dividing a word into sounds, but rather than into syllables, we are going to do it into individual phonemes. So we're going to do just like we did before. We're going to tap it out, but this time individual sounds. So everybody, I'd like you to say moon. Let's tap the sounds we hear in moon. M, oo, n. How many sounds? 3 sounds. I can also use Elkonin boxes. M, oo, n, etc. So that's more difficult to hear the sounds in moon than to hear syllables. Finally, we move to an advanced, so substituting internal phonemes. So this is an activity from David Kilpatrick's Equipped for Reading Success. So I'm going to say a word, I'm going to ask you to repeat the word. Then I'm going to give you a substitution and I'll ask you to say the new word. For example, if I say act, I'm going to ask you all to say act. Now, instead of k, you're going to say n. So the new word is ant. Got it? Okay. When I do this, give me the word, okay? Say rent. Instead of n, say s. Word? Rest. Say fast. Instead of s, say x. Word? Faxed. So there's an example. In this example, it's much more advanced because they're having to identify an internal sound. They're having to segment that sound and replace it with another sound and then blending those sounds together to give me the word. This is much more advanced. And then we could go on to reversal, where I give you a word, you have to say it backwards. Single syllable and multi-syllabic. So it's much more advanced as we continue on. There's a test called the PAST, P-A-S-T, Phonological Awareness Screening tool. It's free. It's the pasttest.com, I believe, that you can use with your students or children to see how phonemically aware they are, and it's free. Okay, let's move on to phonics. Now remember, it's not phonics only, but this seems to be a big sticking point. Phonics is the association between the individual sounds, the phonemes, as well as the written language that represents those sounds, the graphemes. But not all phonics instruction is equal. Some instruction will be embedded phonics, where we'll point things out as the students are reading. We also have analytic phonics, where we look at the words and try to break it up. We also have analogy phonics, which is going to be your word families, that onset and rhyme, looking at and looking at ought or op, all of these word families. And typically in guided reading, in balanced literacy, analogy phonics is as far as they will go. Synthetic phonics and phonics through spelling is what you will see in a structured literacy. So a lot of programs have what they're called sound spelling cards. And the purpose of these is to introduce and reinforce the connections between sounds and spellings. They ideally aren't just wallpaper. Ideally, they are a teaching tool for students to use when they come across a word they don't know how to read, or if they need it for spelling. It's really important that when these cards are introduced, that teachers are really articulating the sounds, that it's not ta, but it's t. I've heard it said by they, whoever they are, is that they we voice the vowel, or we voice the vowels, whisper the consonants. So if I'm trying to say t really loudly to the back of my classroom or across the street, I'm going to be adding that up. Whereas if I whisper it, I'm able to cut that off. Vowel, I can say ah as loud, and it's going to retain that sound. So that's just a little tip that I like to share. So I'm going to be modeling now parts of a structured literacy lesson. Not going to include phonological and phonemic awareness because I just did that. What I am going to now show you is sort of introducing a spelling, decoding with that spelling, teaching kids how to sound out words with that spelling, teaching them how to spell words with that spelling, and then reading text with that spelling to develop fluency. So let's hope my graphics work here. I worked really hard on these slides. I hope there's no glitch. Okay, so here's a classroom. We have our sound spelling cards at the front of the room. We always review previously taught cards, and then we identify the card and the spelling that we are going to be introducing for this lesson. So this is the jump card, and we've already talked about J as representing the J sound. Today we're going to learn a new spelling, short vowel DGE. And I would teach the kids that DGE is a spelling pattern of the J sound when followed by a short vowel. So when you are reading and you have a short vowel and then you see DGE, you will know it's J. Or if you see DGE and you have a vowel in front, you will know to pronounce the vowel short. If in your spelling you have a short vowel and then you hear the J sound, you know that it's going to be DGE. So I am going to teach you our decoding routine. I also want to make it very clear. There are nuanced differences from program to program. This isn't how all programs exactly do it. What I want you to appreciate is the direct instruction, the explicitness, and the routine so that the kids can focus on the content and not on the instruction, okay? I am going to put a spelling up. When I touch that spelling, you are going to say the sound. Every time I put up a spelling, a new spelling, I'm going to touch it and you're going to give me the sound. When I loop under the spellings, you're going to blend those sounds together. And when I sweep under the entire word, you're going to read it naturally. Okay, everybody say the sound. D. Sound. Ah. Now, if any of you said oh, immediate corrective feedback, short, ah, and I'm doing it as well. Ah. Blend, da, sound, j. Blend, dodge, naturally, dodge. Okay, let's do one more. Sound, b, sound, ah, blend, ba, sound, d, blend, badge, read it naturally, badge. So that is how we would slowly introduce the idea of decoding to students. Once they know that routine, once they understand how to decode words, because that's not what it looks like when they have connected text in front of them, we teach them to like whole word blending. So we can just point to the spellings, have them blend those spellings and read the word. For example, if I have the word ridge, it would be sound, 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 blend those sounds and read it naturally. So again, it would be r, I, j, ridge, ridge. So that is how we teach the kids how to decode or sound out words. And then we always want them to go back and reread the words for fluency and automaticity. Furthermore, we want to go back and work with these words and their definitions, whether we outwardly define them or we ask the words to use them in sentences to develop their oral language vocabulary. But the reason why we have them go back and we go back and define these words is that in order to map these onto our brain, we need to work with these words at various levels. We need to work with it at the sound level, the spelling level, as well as the meaning level in order for students to become automatic in recognizing these words. Okay, whoop, I got ahead of myself. You probably saw that word, but just pretend you didn't. So now we would move on to spelling. So we're going to be spelling a word. This is the routine. I am going to give you the word. We're going to segment the word into the individual phonemes or sounds. We are going to then think about the spellings of each sound. And when I say write it, you're going to write the spelling. Do not write anything until I say write it. So the word we're going to spell is bridge. Everybody repeat the word bridge. Good, bridge. Let's think of the sounds we hear in bridge and count them out with me. B, r, I, j. There are 4 sounds in the word bridge. What is the first sound in the word bridge, everybody? B. How do we spell B? B, write it. The next sound is what, everybody? R. How do we spell R? R, write it. What's the next sound in the word bridge? I, I. At this point, for programs or curriculum that have those sound spelling cards, For any of these spelling patterns that are difficult for kids, we can be referring back to those cards and showing them these spellings in case they're having difficulty. So that is it. Spelled, how is it spelled? I, write it. Now, that I is short. The last sound is what, everybody? J. Now, we know this is a short vowel, so how do we spell J? D-G-E, write it. When you're finished writing, I want you to proofread your work. Check yours against mine. B-R-I-D-G-E. Okay, so that is how we teach kids how to spell. Now, some curriculum uses word sorts, and word sorts are okay after the foundation is laid for how to spell these words. That's really important. And we need to talk through with the kids. Why is in the word away, why A-Y for the long A spelling? Why not just A, or why not AI? So kids need to learn the rules or the generalizations of these spelling patterns. We do that in the decoding as well as encoding. Anything we read, we spell. Now, in addition to, so I showed you decoding with one syllable words. Okay, so now we talk about multi-syllabic words because these become much more advanced. So, but very quickly. In first grade, they're reading multi-syllabic words. So we need to teach the kids a strategy so when they come to these words, they're not intimidated by them and they can break them up and read them independently. I'm not going to go through all of these syllable types. I'm just going to teach you the first two because you'll need to know them for the next lesson. The first are open syllables. Open syllables are when a long vowel sound is when a vowel stands by itself at the end of a syllable, it's going to be long, like in program. O is the last sound in the syllable, so this is an open syllable, whereas a closed syllable ends with a consonant. Very simple to teach to the kids. I have the word me, E is an open syllable. This consonant is at the end of the syllable, or the vowel sound, long vowel sound is at the end of a syllable. It's long, it's open. If I close it with a consonant, it's now met, it's a short E, it's closed. Same with if I have the word hi, okay? Long I, it's an open syllable. If I close it with a consonant, we now have him, so it is a closed syllable, therefore short, okay? Here are additional syllable types that you can look up. You'll see charts all over. So we would teach that to the kids, what an open syllable is, what a closed syllable is. We also teach them syllable division patterns. So in this lesson, we are going to be looking at vowel, consonant, consonant, vowel. You also have, I don't know if I put it on here. No, I didn't. You also have vowel, consonant, vowel, vowel, consonant, 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 vowel, among others. And we teach kids the generalizations on where they should be dividing these syllables. So in the word napkin, we would first look at this word and we would identify the vowels. Then we identify the consonants within the vowels. And now, because of our knowledge of syllable division patterns, we know to divide between the two consonants. So we cover up the second syllable and we look at the first syllable. We identify that this is a closed syllable because it ends with a consonant. And we know that that vowel is going to be short. So let's just read that syllable, nap. Then we cover it up and we do the same with the second. Again, we know this is going to be a short I because it's a closed syllable. So let's read that second syllable, kin. Now we blend those two syllables together, nap. Whoops. Nap, kin, read it fluently, napkin. So that is how we can teach dividing multisyllabic words. Again, these are the words that the kids are going to be struggling with the most once they've been taught the code with single syllable words. So we need to be teaching these syllable types and syllable division patterns for students. And we work with them repeatedly so that students can apply them automatically. Building that automaticity is really important, and applying that direct instruction to our instruction is really, really critical. I'm going to show you a word. I want you to look at it, but I don't want you to read it. Okay? How many of you were actually able to look at that word and not read it? Okay? You can't. Once a word is mapped and on your brain, once you know a word, you can't not read it. In fact, your brain processes the word, the printed word chair, faster than it processes the naming of chair when a picture of one is shown. So we want to, and that does not happen through memorization. That does not happen through flashcards. That happens through working with the layers of language of a word, the sounds, the spellings, the meaning. Actually, the letters even before the spellings. So in Scarborough's reading rope, she has not included fluency. And the reason she didn't include fluency is that she says that fluency is a consequence of becoming skilled at something. Not all kids will need additional fluency practice. I'm going to show you fluency through decodables in a minute versus leveled readers. But fluency is the bridge between decoding and comprehension. It is becoming so automatic with reading that you're spending no working memory trying to sound out the words. You just automatically read them, and you can focus all of your attention on what is happening in the text. Fluency happens when accuracy happens. Accuracy is what we work on through decoding. It is, we're not skipping words, we're not using context. Our eyes actually process all the letters in a word, which is how we're able to differentiate between words like casual and causal, or grill and girl. And we can do that automatically as skilled readers. We work on accuracy through our decoding. We work on automaticity through our repeated practice, our cumulative practice of new spellings, as well as previously taught spellings. And this is where we lead to a good rate. This is not speed reading. It is not speed reading. It is a natural rate that we would read. And then prosody is expression or intonation that we work on. So let's look at how that looks in instruction. Fluency through decodables, right? The purpose of decodables is that all of the words in the book, or the majority of the words in the book, can be decoded by the students, sounded out by the students. They support instruction in the new phonic element that is taught while incorporating previously taught elements of phonics. So they are written intentionally. And the scope and sequence of instruction I talked about, from easiest to more challenge or more difficult. There's also a scope and sequence of review, so that we are intentionally reviewing previously instructed sounds and spellings. It provides practice reading words with these target sounds in meaningful connected text. Phonics is not just for word work. Phonics is for any time we read. So here's where we start putting it into practice. Before I go into sight words, something important to note is I see a lot of teachers and parents looking for decodable texts to purchase for themselves or their classrooms, their kids. Decodable books without instruction aren't necessarily decodable books. If the students haven't learned the sound spelling connections that are in those books, then it's not a decodable book for those students. So that's really important to, I just wanted to make that point. So it's not just a matter of implementing decodable books. we need to be following the scope and sequence of instruction that follows along with those decodable books. Before decodable books are presented, we always introduce sight words. Now, sight words is in quotes because there are all kinds of words. I hear sight words, I hear high frequency words, I hear outlaw words, red words, all kinds of words, heart words. If you read literature, the research literature, you'll see sight words. And sight words by definition is any word that you know automatically. That's a sight word. My understanding is that most people, when they're talking about these red words, outlaw words, these are high frequency words. Some of them are decodable words. Some of them are not. The ones that are decodable might be included in a decodable text, and they're taught as a sight word because the students don't have the knowledge of those sound spellings in that word. So they just have to know the word before moving on. Now, we don't just want to have kids memorize these words. And so this is a strategy, for example, to teach words, especially those that don't follow along with the patterns that we would predict. So if I have the word said, everybody tell me, what's the first sound you hear in the word said? How is that spelled? S, that's predictable. What's the last sound in said? D. How is it spelled? D, also what we would expect. The middle sound is the part that we don't expect, AI. That's the part the students have to know by heart. And if we can work with these words in this fashion, students will see, I don't have to memorize the entire word said. I can just commit to memory that the AI is the part that's irregular. Same with the word were. The first is predictable, W. Spelled ER, is predictable. It's the E at the end that is not. Now, with some of these words, we can even go into the etymology of where these words come from. And there is a rhyme or reason for most words why they are spelled the way they are. So we would look and say this is an irregular spelling pattern, but it's actually not based on the history of the word. But we don't have time to get into all of that now. So once we've introduced sight words, high frequency words, outlaw words, we move into the decodable text. So if you look at the text, here's just a sample. This is not an entire, this is just a couple of pages to give you an idea. So if you look at the words needed to know, a, to, and the, those are high frequency words that may not follow spelling patterns we would predict. So we would work with those words similarly to how I just presented them. All the rest of these words can be decoded based on previously taught spelling patterns, including traffic at this point of the word. This is beginning of first grade, including traffic because we would have already started working on multi-syllabic words. Very simple. To show you the alternative, another example of a first grade text, but this is a leveled text, also just a couple of pages from a leveled text. Now, if you look at the words to know in this case, there are quite a few words and a few things that are striking to me. If I look at the actual text itself, I see that turtle, which is on this page 9 here, turtle is not one of the words. And this is merely a guess from me, is that hamster, which is on the previous page on this slide, would need to be taught ahead of time because the kids they're not necessarily going to guess that that's a hamster. But I would expect that most kids would guess that that's a turtle, therefore could read the word turtle. But to me, what's most alarming is that this is the beginning of first grade. It says the words to know is pets. So if they cannot decode the word pets yet, P-E-T-S, very simple word for a beginning first grader to read had they had decoding instruction. Yet, they can read our, which is ow, spelled O-U. In the word teachers, they can read E-A, spelling of long E, C-H spelling of ch, E-R spelling of and Z sound, spelled S in teachers, because it's not teachers. So they would know that. In fur, they would already know U-R is the spelling for In play, they would know A-Y is the long A spelling. So this is not based on phonics. This is based on using picture cues, using the content to guess at the word. Now, reading A to Z also has a variety of decodable text based on a clearly defined scope and sequence. This leveled text is not. Furthermore, with leveled text, if I have a student who knows a lot about animals, this may be a breeze. For a student who doesn't know a lot about animals, this may be a little more challenging, because if I know about hamsters and turtles and guinea pigs, I'm going to be able to recognize those in the pictures and be able to guess what those words are very quickly. Students without a lot of background knowledge may not. So this, for me, could be a level K, but for somebody else could be a level D. It's a little subjective. As I said earlier, fluency, some kids through this work with connected text and applying their decoding will become fluent readers and may not need a lot of explicit instruction beyond that. However, some kids do need additional help with expression. So these are just some different ways that teachers, parents can work with students with working on fluency beyond decodables. The big key is that it needs to be explicit through modeling, guided practice, corrective feedback, and student setting goals. Always explicit, not just go ahead and start reading this, but we actually make sure all of the words can be read accurately even before beginning, okay? That we are modeling that and giving them feedback. The other thing with fluency assessments and running records just assesses rate. But it's important that we are also listening for how the students are reading it, because it's not just speed reading. So we're looking at expression and in volume, reads well with good expression and enthusiasm throughout the text. Or we might look at smoothness, several rough spots in text where extended pauses, hesitations are more frequent and disruptive. And this helps us identify how we can best help a student with their fluency. So that is also something that should be considered. And the final part of our presentation is word analysis. Now, word analysis arguably fits into the language comprehension because this is working beyond phonics. It's focusing on morphemes or individual or the smallest element of meaning in a word, a morpheme. So for example, if I have the word purses, purse has a meaning and S has a meaning, which means more than one. So it's not just an S, but that S actually has a meaning. So we have two morphemes in that word. So that is why it fits in the language comprehension. But I argue it also fits in the word recognition because we want to develop an automaticity in recognizing most common, especially prefixes, suffixes, Greek and Latin roots, so that students, when they get to odd, for example, a root, they don't have to try to sound it out, that they will automatically recognize it. When we teach, so as I said, it helps with reading longer words fluently and determining meaning. I heard this somewhere and I wish I could give credit. I don't know where I heard this. Teaching students to flexibly apply strategies of orthographic decoding and morphological decoding when they encounter an unfamiliar word creates linguistic problem solvers, AKA independent readers. So let me show you very quickly what a word analysis lesson would look like. I would teach the prefixes dis and un, what they mean. Then we would have the words, we would cover them up, to read them, to help the students decode them. We would read dis, like, put it together, dislike. Then we would talk about how adding that word, we would identify the base word, how adding that prefix changed the meaning of the word. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of these, but that would be a lesson that we would teach to the kids. We would also have them read these words or similar words in connected text, where they then have to identify the meanings of the words in connected text. When we are working with these, we don't just teach the meanings, but we also need to talk about how do they change the word? Do they change the word in meaning? Do they change the word grammatically? For example, if I add IVE to a base word, it's going to make it an adjective. So all of that is really important, and we will go more in depth with that when in part 2 of the language comprehension layer of the reading rope. And before I wrap up, Dr. Louisa Moats, if any of you have not heard of Dr. Louisa Moats, she is a legend in the reading world, if you will. And this is one of her slides that really had a strong impact on me when I heard her speak. And I asked her if I could use this slide, and graciously she gave me permission. I can't do it the justice. I've actually never used this slide in a presentation before, and I don't feel I can do the slide justice as much as she can. So I am going to read, I'm not just using her slide, I'm also going to use her words. Our brain has built up over time a sense of what is in this word, okay? Unreachable. If you know the word, your brain very rapidly triggers associations to the meaningful parts or morphemes. So you recognize the prefix, the base word, the suffix, and you know their relationship with the meaning. You know that there are 4 syllables in this word. That's different from the morphemes or meaningful parts. In order to do that, you have learned along the way the letters and letter combinations that represent the individual speech sounds or phonemes. In this case, EA represents a phoneme, CH represents a phoneme, and LE at the end represents the phoneme O. In order to do that, early on, you had to learn the individual letters. There's this sort of pyramid structure through the layers of language that informs our learning of words all the way along. The more we learn about each layer of language and the structures in each layer of language, the more rapidly we can learn new vocabulary, because we might recognize morphemes we've seen before. We might recognize syllable patterns and syllable structures, and hopefully we recognize the graphemes and grapheme sequences and patterns that characterize our language. So in closing, I'd like to show you Nancy Young's ladder of reading. I urge you to visit her website here at the bottom, where she has all of the research that supports this ladder of reading. If you look at this, you'll see that for 10 to 15% of students, this structured literacy is imperative. It is absolutely necessary. For 40 to 50%, those kids are at risk for not learning to read without structured literacy. Doesn't mean they won't, but they're at a higher risk without it. For 35%, the lighter green box, those students may learn to read easily, but maybe they'll just be okay readers, and parents may not know that if they had had structured literacy, they could have been great readers. So with structured literacy, it will fill the holes that might make these okay readers great readers. And you've heard of the 4th grade slump. Well, text gets extremely more complex. Therefore, through structured literacy, we can keep being teachers of reading. So if anybody's heard, K through 2 is learning to read, 3 through 5 is reading to learn, I argue against that. Teachers still need to help students figure out how to make text less complex. Is it the words, the vocabulary, whatever it may be, is it the morphology, especially when we get into science text? We need to be helping the kids with those words. So those 35% still could use structured literacy. But there still needs to be differentiation. And that's really important. Some students have trouble with different strands of the rope. They need more So there's not one size fits all. So some kids may need more practice with phonemic awareness. Some kids may need more repetition with certain sound spellings. But the structured literacy approach will work for all students. So I'm going to wrap it up here. I would like to thank you all for being here. I think Rachel Deppa is going to do the final wrap up, and I will be sticking around to answer any questions. So thank you all for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Wendy, for the time you put in tonight. We're looking forward to part 2. When preparing for tonight, I had asked Wendy to give us some key takeaways for parents, educators, and legislators. The first thing that Wendy told me is the first rule of reading is keep your eyes on the word. Her second thing was reading is a complex skill that needs to be taught like all other skills. It's based on data and foundational skills that are taught in a specific time and sequence for a reason. And then her third point, and I think she stressed this a few times, is reading comprehension is an outcome. It is not a strategy or a skill that needs to be taught. Tonight's webinar was really intended to show parents how complex reading and teaching reading really is. We have dedicated teachers in Minnesota. We have hardworking students, and it is the goal of Decoding Dyslexia Minnesota and its coalition members to put tools into the hands of teachers through professional development that will allow teachers to reach every student in their classroom where they are at. We often say when we testify that you don't know what you don't know, and this is true of students, it's true of our parents, and it's true of our educators. DDMN would like to thank all of you for joining us tonight. Before we go into the Q&A, I want to encourage you to find us on our social medias using the handler @DyslexiaMN. For parents, we're inviting you to join our Facebook group for parents called Dyslexia in Minnesota Parent Support Group. If you are so inclined, we ask that you write your legislator and encourage them to support Senate File 244 and House File 288, the Letters Appropriation Bill. There are sample letters at decodingdyslexiaminnesota.org. We also have House File 743 and Senate File 702, which removes the word balance from statute definitions.